to the show.
I'm Bill Aucoin, and I watch rock and roll all night.
Okay, we're going to do a Q&A with Bill Aucoin right now. If it wasn't for him, none of us would be here, I think.
Okay. I guess you did. That's a good idea. Here we go. We actually brought something. We brought a couple things. I usually don't bring anything to these conventions, but this time I did. I actually was convinced to go into some of my stash and bring some things. So the first thing I brought is, this was the gold microphone that was given to Kiss back in '78 by Shure. And Shure started doing things where they would give major groups gold microphones. So this is a Kiss gold microphone that we got from Shure back in 1978. And I'm going to show you a couple other things. This was the first prototype of a Kiss Army jacket back in the 70s. You see what initially looked like. And one of the things that no one has seen, which I got out, which is unusual, and I don't think you'd ever know it. You probably thought it was made by a fan, but this was the original artwork that was...
I can't see it.
This was the original artwork that was done for Phantom of the Park. What happened was, after we shot Phantom of the Park, NBC needed some artwork to put in TV Guide and all the newspapers, and no one had done any. So Hanna-Barbera, who put up the money for the film and the deal to do 6 pictures with NBC, had one of their sketch artists make this overnight and send it to NBC to put into TV Guide. So this was the original. It was done by Tom Crabtree out on the West Coast, and this was in TV Guide and all the newspapers. So no one's ever seen this. First time I brought this out since we did the movie, actually. All right, so someone gonna ask questions and take care of it, Lou?
Well, we're going to let these people ask the questions, right? Did you pay to get in? You want to ask the questions? Okay. Who's got the first question? Come on right up here. All right.
Come on, someone step
Right here.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell us about your thoughts about Eric Carr?
Well, Eric was a real sweet guy and a great drummer. And after we went through about 70 so drummers, Eric was the one we found to take. And ironically, as we went through it, it became kind of a little crazy because the guys really didn't know what he was going to be like, or what kind of a character he was going to be, or how it was going to work with the fans. They were really pretty much scared of the whole thing. And we were going to do one show in New York at the Academy of Music, which is now the Palladium. And then we were going to go to Europe. So we knew we had to announce who the new drummer was going to be and what kind of character he was going to be. And as we were rehearsing at the Academy of Music to do this one show for the press and for fans, that was the first time that Paul and Gene actually got mad at me one night before the show. We still hadn't done the costume. We weren't really sure about the costume. We weren't really sure about the makeup for Eric. And Gene and Paul actually came to me in the dressing room and said, "Look, you're the manager. It's up to you. We're leaving. We don't want to have any part of this anymore." Actually, the first time we ever really had kind of an argument was that night. And they just left. And Eric and I stayed up all night. We finished the costume. We decided on the makeup between the two of us. And the next day we came in, and Gene and Paul came back and said, "It's done? Yes, it's done." But they were so nervous about finally putting someone else in the band, they never said anything about it, and we went off to Europe. So that was Eric. Eric actually turned out to be a real sweet guy, although toward the end kind of got the bad end of the stick from the guys, but he was great, really a great person. Okay. Next.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering, did you hear anything about Peter Criss leaving and why? And
Yeah, look at it. It's been known for a while that Gene and Paul wanted to get rid of Peter, and it's been for the last couple of years. And I think what happened, although I don't know the exact particulars, but I do know that they offered Peter a deal that was less than Ace, and Peter said, "Look, I should get at least what Ace is getting." That allowed Gene to kind of start the momentum for getting rid of him. And what they did is they gave Ace a little more, even more than they offered him, so he would definitely stay, because they couldn't have done it without Ace. And then they gave Eric Singer a little piddlings to come in and wear Peter's makeup. and I told a few of you here today already that what happened was when Peter left the first time, I made sure that he kept all his rights, so that he would own everything that he had, and that he would get all the royalties. Well, in the 80s and early 90s, Peter sold that back to Gene and Paul. So that when this happened this time around, they had the right to do whatever they wanted to, including use his makeup and everything else. They couldn't have done it before because I made sure Peter had his rights. So when Peter sold his rights back to Kiss later on, now Paul and Gene own those rights. So they could put anyone in Peter's makeup now, and that's what they're doing with their singing. Yeah.
So would you say stardom is what the Gene said?
Well, look, Gene, as you all know, is pretty fickle about things, and money is one of the things he's in. He likes to have it his way, and Gene never wanted Ace and Peter to come back. You know, I had fights for years over this, about them getting back for the reunion and everything, and he didn't really want to do it. And what happened was, when they started doing the KISS conventions themselves, the reason they did it is because they really couldn't tour anymore. They had really toured themselves out, and promoters wouldn't give them the money to go back out on tour. So they did the KISS conventions, and then through the KISS conventions, they got to know Peter and Ace again, because Peter and Ace came back to some of them, and they knew that they could talk, and it wasn't so bad, and maybe, and then what happened is when they did the MTV reunion, you know, the Unplugged, and they saw the reaction of the fans and all the reaction they got from the fans watching, they knew that that's what they had to do when they came back together again. But there was never, unfortunately, there was never really that camaraderie. In fact, when I went to see them at Madison Square Garden, it was really obvious to me. Gene and Paul's dressing room was way down one side of the backstage, and they had put Peter and Ace way over the other side. So they, you know, and that, of course, when I was managing them, I'd never allow that. They had to be together. It was either a unit or there wasn't. And what happens when you separate yourself like that, you're bound to have more animosity because you're not together. So when you're together, you have to live with the good and the bad. But when you split yourself up, then, you know, so I'm not really surprised at Peter being forced out, and I think they would have had Ace. They would have forced out Ace, except for the fact that they couldn't. I mean, you know, you couldn't replace Ace. You might be able to hide someone behind the drums a bit, but you'd never be able to replace Ace. So.
Yes, one more question, Bill. If you had to work with KISS again after the reunion show, what would you have done differently to try to maintain the success that they had on the reunion show?
Well, it would have been rough. I mean, actually, Gene did call me to come back for the reunion, and the problem with it is it never would have been the same. You know, I was there the first 10 years, and after finding a group when they were working, you know, for $25 a night and just barely being able to get around, and developing them and having all that fun and doing things that no one had done before, it would have been hard for me to go back because it wouldn't have been the same. First of all, it would have been under the thumb of Gene, which I wouldn't have done, so we probably would have been screaming at each other. And the only thing that probably would have helped me is I know where all the bodies are buried, but other than that, it just wouldn't have been fun. So, you know, I said no to him when he called and answered us. Okay, someone else. All right, come on up here. Okay. So everyone can hear. Yeah.
Could you please tell us one of your funniest Ace stories that maybe we've never heard before? Because I know you must have a million of them.
Funniest Ace story. Well, okay, I'll tell you one story. I'm not sure you've heard this. I don't think I said this at the last convention I did here. Ace was, Ace was Ace. As you pretty much know the Tom Snyder story and everything, but if you want me to tell a Tom Snyder story with Ace, I'll tell you about how it happened and why they worked out that way. But the great thing about Ace is we used to go to his house. Ace liked to collect helicopters, little remote control helicopters. And if he had drunk just enough that day, and he knew you were coming, what he would do is he would driving down his driveway, get buzzers in the car, get helicopters coming out of the sky and out of the bushes and out of the trees. So you wound up driving off the road and up on his lawn, and that was Ace. But that was a great part of it. So, the other story about Ace, which you might not know, though it's one of my favorite moments, was the Tom Snyder show. And the reason Ace got along so well on that show and had such a great time and came across it because Gene and Paul hated it, especially Gene. If you notice, Gene was always kind of snickering and looking off, and he was looking at me, basically saying, do something about this. But when you do these network shows, what they usually do is they send out producers, and they'll interview you ahead of time, so they know pretty much what you like, whether you'll talk or not, or whatever. So when they sent the producer up to Ace's house, Ace was getting over a hangover, didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't care, get away from me, okay, I have to do this, fine. So we really didn't talk. So the reports went back to Tom Snyder that, oh, Gene's good, Paul's good, and you can talk to Peter a bit, but Ace, he doesn't even talk. So what happens is we get there, and Tom Snyder has these lists, and he also has the notes about who to talk to, who will really talk, who won't, who so forth, because he wants the show to go good. Well, when he finally gets to Ace, and he figures Ace is just going to nod his head or say something, all of a sudden Ace is talking. And he's laughing, and now Snyder thinks, my staff played a trick on me. They just were going to get me, because Ace is really the one to talk to, right? So he thought his staff played a trick on him by saying Ace won't talk. Because when he got to Ace, Ace was talking about everything. So he ignored Peter, he ignored Paul and Gene, because he thought Ace was the guy that he was going to get to. And of course, Ace loved it. And we finished a half a bottle of champagne off before we did the show. So he was in great spirits. So those are two good stories. But there's a lot of stories about Ace. Anyone else? Okay. Come on, step up. Here we go, right over here. Go over here.
Do you know if this will be a second leg to the Pittsburgh Aucoin?
Well, they, it was supposed to already happen. The problems about Ace had threatened to quit, and Peter had threatened to quit, and in fact, Peter, there was a couple of shows that Peter didn't play. Eric Singer actually came and played, and there was a moment. It didn't actually happen, but there was a moment when Ace wasn't going to play, and Tommy Thayer, who all of you, if you know Tommy, who's the key guy now at the KISS organization, Tommy was going to play Ace, and he has done it before. He knows all the parts, and actually was getting dressed up with his makeup on. So that there was a lot of controversy during that part, but they were already supposed to do another tour. It didn't happen, and now we'll see. They're in Japan now, and I'm going to do an anthology for VH1 with them. I think I'm shooting my part on the 29th of this month, this week. But yeah, so we're all get together a little bit. We'll see what happens. And then supposedly they're going to do Shea Stadium or Madison Square Garden at the end, and I just hope they bring back Peter. I hope that no matter what happens, that last show, they'll make some sort of commitment to Peter to bring back, because it doesn't make sense not to have all of them back for that last show. Okay, who else?
You know what's going on with the live tour?
A live tour. Well, you have to know there never was a real live album with Kiss. The truth of the matter is no one ever played or sang well enough to have a live album. So every album that you thought was live was never live. The first album, Alive, we redid most of it at Electric Lady. And the only thing that was really live on the first one was Peter's drums. And almost everything else was replaced. In fact, what you call an audience loop, which is really basically a loop of the audience applause and screaming and everything, we had made a tape that actually ran out of the control room all the way around Studio A, around the wall, all the way back and into the tape machine, because I didn't want any of the audience to sound like it was the same thing over and over again. So, they really have never really done a live album. Every album that was live has really been mostly redone in the studio. So this one is the same. They've had to redo most of it, and I don't know what's going to happen with it, actually, now. I don't know how Peter's affected by it or what they're going to do by that. So, okay, who else?
Whatever happened to Stars?
To what? Oh, Stars. Oh, well, actually, I remember it was Richie Rano. Richie Rano's around here, and Richie has one of the biggest KISS conventions in New York every year. And actually, Richie and I were talking about maybe having Stars back on the road for a week, And they were a great band. Michael, everyone's, I guess, available, says Richie. Richie's trying to convince Brendan to come back, who's now has his own studio and produces down in Nashville. So he's kind of planted there. But I think it might happen. I'd like to see it happen.
Phil, what do you think?
Shake right there.
What do you think Kiss should have done after the reunion tour?
You're trying to get that out of me, yeah? Well, I still think, I don't think you can have people come back and look at everyone was running out of money, including Gene and Paul. So the idea was necessary, and I think they knew it would happen. I think it was hard when, I think they had to do a better approach than kind of just pay Peter and Ace like they were like pickup guys and or studio guys. They had to make them feel like they were really a part of it. And from the very beginning, as the tour came around, they were hired helpers. They were just hired to do it. They weren't part of KISS really. And I think that was, to me, it's the beginning of the end right there. You knew that something was going to happen from that. So I think I would have tried to arrange, yes, okay, Paul and Gene actually did the work to put it together, so maybe they deserve more, but I would have worked out some sort of a percentage for them so that the money thing, if they did well, which it did, and they weren't sure, it did better than well. If they had done that well, then that Peter and Ace would have really gotten a bigger shot of it. And instead, that Gene and Paul really took all that, the getting revenue, and so from the word go, even though Peter and Ace were paid for it, they felt like, well, we're here working and fans love us, and how come we're not really a part of this? Yeah, so there was a problem right from the beginning. I would have tried to circumvent that, I think, probably the most part, because that was going to come back to bite them no matter what. Okay, go on, I guess.
Yeah, what did you personally see in them to want to manage it?
Well, I'll tell you what I look for in any artist is really determination, because there's too many ups and downs. An artist can have a good song and or sing well or perform well, and I've met lots of artists over the years and even now that won't stick with it. They either expect the big record deal or the money to come in or the tour to happen, automatically, and it just doesn't. And the great thing about them, they first wrote to me. Gene actually wrote to me every week. I was doing a television show on NBC called Flipside, which I was directing and producing, and every week I would get a little handwritten note from Gene, come see us, here's a little backstage pass, So after 13 weeks on the network, and getting legend to death every week because they didn't want contemporary artists on the network, they didn't think they belonged, so I had people like John Lennon and Stevie Wonder, and they wanted Frank Sinatra and someone else. So they just didn't understand what I wanted to do. So after 13 weeks and then beating me up every week, I finally said, that's enough. I want to go in the music business. And so I went to look for an act. And one of the acts I went to look at, because they wrote to me every week, was KISS. And the one thing I knew after meeting them was that they were really determined. They wanted it more than anything. And that's what made me decide to do it. And even today, I turn down a lot of acts if I see the weakness that they really want it given to them as opposed to work for it, because I have a philosophy. Until you get your record deal, you're minus something. When you get your record deal, you finally made it to 0. So now we have to work from 0 to 100. So unless you really want to do this, it's almost impossible. And in fact, most record labels, and I'm involved with a new label at Atlantic Records, and one of our philosophies in most A&R departments is, if you like a band, don't sign them for 6 months, because in 6 months most likely they won't be around. So you have to see whether or not they're determined and they're really stable enough to continue. Otherwise, the minute you sign your name to a piece of paper from a label point of view, it's about $500,000 to $1 million. That's all the costs considered about what it takes to put out a CD. So, yeah. All right, let's go.
Hey, Bill. Was there an initial idea for the band to push out with another concept album of Music from the Elder? Like, how did that come about?
Well, no. The real story about the Elder is somewhat sad. Not because it was done, but because no one wanted to do an album. The record label needed an album. Gene and Paul didn't want to go back in the studio. Ace absolutely didn't want to go back in the studio. And Eric would have done anything, obviously, because he was a paid sideman with this. But so the reason I went to Bob Ezrin was simple. Bob had done Destroyer. He knew about the ups and downs of them. He knew the personalities. Because even in Destroyer, Peter got mad at Bob, and we had Anton Fig come in and play something, and Ace was mad at Bob one day. We had Bob Hewitt come in and play something. So Ezrin knew the ups and downs, the personalities. But he's a very bright and very tenacious producer. In other words, he knows what he has to do and he gets it done, and extremely intelligent. So I knew if there was any, I couldn't explain this to someone who didn't know them, because they would have quit and walked off. So that's why I asked Bob Ezrin to come back. When Bob came back and realized none of them were writing, no one was writing rock and roll songs, no one wanted to be in the studio, we came up with an idea to do this concept. So that kind of gave an idea. Oh, great, a concept. So all of a sudden we had a positive ending. We're going to do a concept. Now, no one knew what it was going to be, but but at least we got over the hump about starting the album. But then it really turned out to be an Ezrin. Bob went in after that, went to do Pink Floyd, and you can see a lot of his ideas in it. It really was more a Kiss Bob Ezrin album than it really was a Kiss album. But we got an album done, and of course then the record company didn't like it, and the fans didn't like it, and everything, and I get blamed for it a lot. I mean, a lot of times Gene and Paul would say, well, Bill had us do this, but the truth of the matter is no one really wanted to do it. It was really an odd time. Yeah, okay. Okay, how about anyone else? Now's the time.
I don't think we've touched on this enough, but with the recent use of Eric Singer's makeup with the cat makeup and everything, Gene keeps on going around. It was simple for him to decide just have Eric wear the cat makeup. I just want to know, like, when Peter left the band at that time, did he give up the rights to his makeup, or?
I had already said this, but when he left the band initially, well, he didn't leave the band initially. He was let go from the band initially, and the only thing I could do, because I didn't want him to go, I wanted us to take a breather of a year or so, let Peter get himself back together again, but Gene and Paul didn't want to do that, and it was Ace and me against Gene and Paul, and it became very awkward, and then it just didn't work, but the one thing I could do, because everyone felt awkward about it, it gave me a little bit of a leg up on the contract, the release contract. So because of that, because they felt a little guilty about him going, although they wanted him gone, it allowed me to make sure that in Peter's release contract that he kept all of his rights, all of his face, makeup, anything to do with Peter Criss, all of his royalties. But then years after that, after I was gone, Peter sold them back to Gene and Paul. So when they let him go this time, he didn't have any rights, and they had the rights to all the makeup and everything. So they could have put it on anyone. Yeah.
Basically, he owned like part of the corporation to like the late '80s when they basically bought him out.
Yeah.
So he got like royalties on
everything. Yeah, everything. Yeah.
He was smart.
Yeah, well, he was, and it's a shame because I had told both Peter and Ace, although I wasn't around when Ace left, that they should keep that to themselves. Otherwise, they should try to hold on to their image because it would always be worth something. And Ace sold it when he left. He sold it to them when he left. So they could even replace Ace, except you can't replace Ace. No one can stumble quite like Ace.
I don't know if you remember Vinny Benson.
Yeah, but
now, I've heard some legal action, and I know all the bad news.
Yeah.
Now, what is the state of Vinny Vincent's right to the band? And
there isn't any, really. Yeah. Vinny, if there was anyone more emotional than Peter, no, I take it back. Peter was very emotional. Vinny's very paranoid. It's a different manifestation. I mean, I dealt with Vinny on his solo career for 1 week. And I tell you that if Vinny called me once, Vinny must have called me 100 times a day. By the time I got through the week, I would have killed him. I literally had to call him and say, I can't, Vinny just was scared of everything. Everyone was always against him. Everything was always bad. Everything was always, it's never going to work. It's never going to this. People are against me. I mean, Vinny was a tough one. He was a tough thing, and I couldn't handle Vinny. It was just, and neither could the guys, obviously. All right, let's keep going. If anyone needs an answer, I'm into telling the truth today. Go ahead.
Does it have anything to do with the musical direction that they went in? How they were changing from rock and then they went to pop and
well, I probably gave into them more than I should have because both Paul and Gene were the main writers. Really were more Beatles fans than they were rock and roll. The rock and rollers were really Peter and Ace, and that's why I love Peter and Ace. And Ace probably was my favorite. I used to call him Acifer. I still do today call him Acifer, but they were the real rock and rollers, and Gene and Paul were really more the business. literally more Beatles fans. In fact, if you went to a party with them and their friends around, we wouldn't play rock and roll music. They would get their guitars out and play Beatles music. So they were more that side. So a lot of times we would kind of swing away from the hard rock and roll because of that, because that was their biggest influence. So from that point of view, there are times when I wish I hadn't allowed them to do it, because fans really wanted them to be, really hard rockers, and sometimes we would sway from that. And that probably wasn't a good decision, but in that case, that's what they love to do, and I allowed that to happen. So that's pretty much where that went. Okay. Now we're here.
Right here. Oh,
For the what?
Charleston show.
No, they knew it. I mean, all of that, all of that was coming to a head, a long time before that. So that was, it was. They all knew about it. And Peter is an emotional Italian, which is great, because he's a fun guy to be around, especially when he's up. When he's down, he's not so much fun, but when he's up. And Peter doesn't hold any punches. I mean, Peter's not a good negotiator, because he'll let you know way ahead of time what he wants to do. I'm leaving about a month from now. I'm leaving. Now I'm going. So by the time you decide that, everybody knows and everyone's frustrated and everyone's been through it. So by the time he actually did anything, he couldn't very well hold it over their heads, because they had already known about it for so long. Yeah. Okay. Anybody? Here we go.
Hi, Bill. How you doing? I've been with the whole time, so I hope I'm not repeating questions somebody already asked. What's your opinion on that book that totally ripped Ace apart? You know that one, Kiss Himself?
Yeah. A lot of the books, you have to understand, and it'd probably be the same way if I do my book. I've been asked a few times to do the book, but anyone who writes the book from their perspective. So there's 3 or 4 of us. Look, all of us here could look at the same thing, whether it's a band or an artist or someone talking, and have a different idea about what they said or how they played. And so the same thing goes from a writer, even if they've been around. And then it also depends on how they were treated and what they felt, and so all the books that I've read, look, there's a little bit of truth in everything, no matter what. So if you knew the situation, you could decipher what was really happening and what wasn't. So all I can tell you about the different books that have been read, and there are more coming out, is that everyone does them from their own perspective, and usually they do them by what they want you to know, as opposed to maybe what they don't want you to know. So, okay. Hello.
Okay, a couple more questions, and we're going to do the Polaroids with Bill, and whoever didn't get an autograph will get their chance to now.
All right.
One more after him.
I was wondering, have you heard anything about Lydia Chris's book coming out? I don't know.
Yes, she's almost ready, and Lydia knows a lot of the heavy secrets. So I don't know how. I hope she says a lot of the things that really happened. With Lydia Chris, we made a decision when we did Kiss and did the first album that we didn't want anyone to know that Peter was married. So Lydia had a rough time. Now Lydia knew about this, but you can imagine being married to someone and basically being pushed aside. And basically for the first couple of years, no one knew Lydia was just some gal who was hanging around the dressing room. And in truth, obviously she was married to Peter, and it was rough. But yeah, her book is about to come out. So. No, hello.
Do you think when Eric Carr joined the band, if you were to tour the States, that the band would sustain the level of success that...
Well, we didn't have a choice. The next tour that was booked was Europe. So, whether or not if we had been playing the States instead of going to Europe...
No, even after going to Europe, you came back to the States to show the American fans the way the band was with Eric Carr, because I've seen some footage. Just thinking if the American fans have seen that, you guys maybe would stay at that level.
Maybe. I mean, Eric was an incredible person, so you have to know. The saddest part about the ending of all that, as some of you probably know, is Gene canceled his insurance at the very end, and then he died a couple of days later. It was a really bad situation. But and I don't think Gene did it because he thought he was going to die, so I don't mean to imply that. But it really got to be a real bad kind of a business situation toward the end, where it's unfortunate because he was a terrific guy. He was always an employee of PIS. The only time that when I brought him in, the only thing that we did is, I think we brought him in, I made a deal with him to pay him $100,000 a year, and we bought him a new Porsche because we wanted him to feel like a rock and roll star, and a couple of other things. But all that kind of went away, and he really, instead of feeling part of it as years went on, he kind of felt a little more unhappy. And when he got sick and had the heart problem, that was the end. As far as he and Paul was concerned, they had to replace him. So, and from a business point of view, it was right. They did have to. But it became a very sad thing. And when Gene called him and to tell him that they were canceling his insurance, and with all that heart surgery and everything else, you can imagine. And I mean, I want to make it clear, I don't mean that that's what finally killed him. But 2 days later, he died. And his family always felt very odd about that whole thing with Gene. But if you knew Eric and knew what a sweet guy he was and how he was always there to help, it was really sad. Okay.
All right, let's give it up for Aucoin.
All right. If anyone wants to ask you more questions, I'll be over at the table for a while, and I think I'm going to either sell a few things. Maybe I'll sell these things so I don't have to bring them back. So, because I can't give them to Lou. Okay. I'll see you at the table.
Good.
Rock and Roll All Night brings you interviews, reviews, concerts, music, and more. So for more Rock and Roll All Night content, click subscribe.